are discussing climate change at a literature festival, and you might be thinking, why? Well, because there is a story in it, and it's a story about all of us. The Anthropocene is a term coined to describe the current geological epoch, and it reflects the unprecedented influence of human actions on the Earth's ecosystems. From industrialization to deforestation, our activities have left an indelible mark on this planet, altering its landscapes, biodiversities, and climate systems for better or for worse. And at the heart of this discussion lies climate change, an undeniable consequence of human-induced factors such as our greenhouse gas emissions and the exploitation of natural resources. And then we have our country, Bhutan. We all know the story, a tiny Himalayan country strapped for resources, which prioritized the preservation of its environment, pledging to remain carbon neutral perpetually by conserving its forests. However, we're also at a time where we are grappling with our own narratives. For instance, to think about creating a country that lives up to the economic aspirations of its people. So, where do we go from here then? Today, we have a very exciting panel of practitioners who care about the changing climate and its impacts on us scientifically. We have Karma, socially and policy-wise, Thinley and Khurshid. I'm also elated to see friends and participants, but also some people doing incredible work in the environment sector here in Bhutan, regional, and around the world. So thank you so much for your presence. Well, to start off, my first question is then, what does the Bhutan climate story mean to you? Let's start with Karma.
Thank you, Namgay. And before I start and jump into talking about climate change, let me take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this festival, and especially Her Majesty Ajidojo Mwanchu, for providing me the opportunity to share my story in this festival about the climate change in Bhutan, what I have observed. You know, as the importance of climate change and its impact is already highlighted by Namgay, so I don't have to go back and reiterate on this one. But what I would like to say is, a few months back, I had the opportunity to attend an IPCC session in Switzerland, where the sixth assessment report of the IPCC was endorsed. So, as you all may know, that IPCC is a body and the credible scientific body on which all the climate change policies and negotiations are done in the Conference of Parties. So in that one now, since Bhutan lies in the Himalayas and we are a part of the high mountain nations, the impact of climate change has been highlighted in that scientific report. And the news is not good. We all have seen the report, and all the students, I think, if you search for that report on the Google, and you don't have to go through the 1,000 pages report, but I strongly recommend you all to go through at least the policy summary, so that you can have a better understanding of the impact of climate change on the high mountain nations where Bhutan belongs. And as a civil servant in my past 26 years of my career, I had a good opportunity to travel to the mountains so many times, number of times. And I have seen on the ground what is happening on the glaciers and glacial lakes in the northern part of the country. You may not believe, the glaciers in Bhutan are receding at an accelerated pace. For example, we have 3 benchmark glaciers in Bhutan so far. And on the average, these glaciers are receding at a rate of around ranging from 12 to 16 meters per annum. And imagine these glaciers receding at this pace, how long this will last. And also, when you talk about glaciers, you have to keep in mind that it is a vital part of a water resource. And in that context, I bring the story of how the climate change impacts the cryosphere of Bhutan.
So, your question, what does Bhutan's climate story mean to me? Um, I think for me, it's been a bit, I would say it's different shades of green. It's been a bit complicated. It's been good depending on what context you're talking about, because as Namgay shared, we've had history and an exemplary climate stewardship, environmental stewardship and leadership. But I think that narrative helps us sometimes, but it boxes us sometimes too, because then it kind of gives the message, or we are boxed in a space where uh, Bhutan has it figured out in terms of climate change, but we have not had it figured out. Obviously, climate change impacts. We may do a share as a country in terms of forest conservation and in terms of some of our um, far thinking and environmental policies, but I think climate change is something that knows no boundaries, and we are getting impacted, as Karmatep just explained, how despite our almost 70% forest cover, our glacier is still receding, and the impact it has on not only the hydrological system of our country, but also the livelihood of communities and people who live downstream, and most of our villages and the settlements are in the valleys and the villages. So for me, Bhutan climate story has been something that um, bringing the environmental conservation or bringing the environmental leadership down to a human level. And we've reached this far. We're lucky that we've had the history and the leadership that we have. But moving forward, what do we do as Bhutanese citizens? And I think whether you're young or old, all of us have to think about putting ourselves as individuals in the center, and the choices and the decisions that we make, as well as how we think through a comprehensive climate lens, because climate change impacts everything. Climate change is not a standalone thing, and I think a lot of things in life is not standalone. But when we apply and when we learn knowledges, we tend to silo them. So for me, Bhutan climate story as a practitioner in the field, and especially working with young people, is to bring all of this together and to put, especially given my work with young people and women, to put them in the center and to say, what can you as a young person or as a female, what do you have, what are your assets, what can you do, what is your aspiration, and how can you apply moving forward. So again, back to your question, so Bhutan climate stories to me has been a bit of a complicated web to navigate, and I would say that I'm still navigating, because there's a lot of things happening in the climate space, and with tech involved in it, is highly accelerated as well. So I'll stop at that for now.
Thank you. um, okay, so to me, I think there are two dimensions. One at a personal front, other as a UN official. Let me start with my personal story first. I come from Bengal Delta. It's a country called Bangladesh. One of the most fertile piece of land in the world. When I was grown up, I began to understand that the Bengal Delta is a gift of Himalaya. And Bhutan has made a tremendous contribution to grow that delta. That delta is fertile in a sense, is the fourth largest rice producing country in the world. It's one of the highest fish producing countries in the world. So that connectivity, the gift of Bhutan to give birth of that delta, is very important part of the story, often not told. What is very important, the sacrifice that Bhutan has made to make sure that the environment is clean, your water system is pure, that benefits other part of the Bengal Delta. That story is never told, but it's very rooted at a personal level to me. The second part, as the UN, we're very proud, and I'm very proud to serve Bhutan over the last 2 years. My heart is filled with joys to serve Bhutan for a couple of reasons that I picked up, and I'm fascinated by those two stories. One is emerging, and other is already told. Karma already talked about that. It's a carbon negative country. But what is important here, the sacrifice that Bhutan has made to make sure it has not happened randomly. It was designed, it was the vision of the country, it was vision of the monarchs and his majesty, that Bhutan would remain carbon neutral. The forest coverage 60% has to be protected, that is constitutionally mandated. These are the global lighthouse. These are the global example for us as a UN to take the global stage. So my UN side story for Bhutan is the global lighthouse, and Bhutan can inspire other countries to take the similar path. My third point, Namgay, then I'll stop. What is emerging then? As Namgay very rightly said at the beginning, that we live in a carbon civilization, and that carbon civilization is a result of another story. That story was created through the European Renaissance, that you know that the industrial revolution that caused and triggered the climate change today is a result of an imagination that we need a better life, and accidentally we adopted a carbon-based society and civilization. But what Bhutan has inspiring today is a other side of the story, and that is very important. When if you see that many of the countries are now industrialized, and they have taken a path which in environmental language, and Lee Kuan has the former president of Singapore has popularized that, is a grow now and clean later. That means we can have growth now, and we can pollute, and when we become rich, we will clean. But what Bhutan has very consciously taken a path, then we can prosper at the same time take care of nature. So that balance, and I would call it planet first approach, and that story is emerging, and I think that story is very powerful again, and that story has huge potential to impact how we see SDGs, how we see prosperity, and how other country can also learn that path. Over to you, Namgay.
Thank you. So, what I gather is that there are many stories rather than one single narrative, and it's important to think about the complexities and the nuances that these stories might have. There are also various climate futures that we can imagine. And to that, I want to ask my speakers then, how do you see young people playing a part in these narratives and subsequently for climate action? How do you bring young people into the conversation? And I think this is a very important question, because if you look at our audience here, it's a lot of young people here. So what is something that you want them to take away from your answers? We could start with Thinley, perhaps.
Yeah, so I think young people are very important, and I think you hear often young people are the future, but I say young people are the present. You guys are young right now, and that's where you use your agency, and that's where you use your voice. That's where you find avenues, find allies. When I say allies, older people, organizations, institutions. Speaking specifically here for Bhutan, I think there is a lot of curiosity, there's a lot of energy amongst young people. I think what they don't have, and now slowly there's a growing number of platforms of where young people are engaged. But I think regardless of the platform, the first step is for people in the government, for people, policymakers, international organizations, everyone, is to listen first. I think we have to really, truly listen to what the young people, what their experiences are, what their worldviews are, how do they, now because we're talking of climate change, let's say, how do they view the world through a climate lens, and if they even understand what a climate lens means, or if they even understand what climate change means, because sometimes the concept of climate change can be so overwhelming because it pretty much encompasses everything. So as much as we call on the young people and we say they are important stakeholders, we have to bring them on. We have to create avenues and we have to create pathways and give them the guidance, give them the tools, give them the skills to talk about it and to engage with organizations and to be part of the ecosystem in a way that is not just tokenistic, meaning like, oh, I have a young person here, so therefore, young people are involved. But rather to involve them right from the beginning. And young people make mistakes. We older people have years of experience on our side to know what it is. So, when you engage young people, they have the energy, they have a lot of enthusiasm, they have a lot of curiosity, but you need to guide their energy, you need to engage the energy, you need to listen to them, and their mistakes should be taken as lessons for us as elders in the society, as well as for the system and organizations. You make young people making one mistake and them saying, these young people, they don't know what they're doing. See, we gave them the chance, they failed, and then to sideline them, I don't think that's the approach because they're learning. So yeah, I think that's in terms of engaging with the young people, we really, number one is to first listen, then engage, then guide them and give them the skills, the tool sets, the framing, the language. We, four of us, or including Namgay, you four of us, we can speak the language because we have done this so many times and we know the terms. Sometimes young people don't even know how to articulate what it is. So I think engaging young people is a lot of this guiding and hand-holding, but not prescribing. I think as elders, we tend to prescribe and we tend to think we know what's best for them. Sometimes it's not knowing what best for them is to guide them to figure out what's best for themselves. So that would be my contribution.
And to Khurshid, I want you to elaborate on how the UN is catering to the different perspectives and narratives that young people bring to the climate conversation.
Thank you, Namgay. And I want to emphasize what Thinley said, that the young people, of course, you are the future leaders, but you are also present. Let me just start with the Secretary General's recent mention leading up to the Climate Ambition Summit that he's convening at the sideline of UN General Assembly. He said that the global warming that Karma mentioned very simplified way, the era of global warming has ended. So we are in an era of global boiling. I think what he wanted to convey through that message that we're not doing enough. We can go on that. I'm sure we can talk about Secretary General plan about the Ambition Summit. But what he is trying to do is to make sure that all the stakeholders are part of that journey. And he has created a panel of young people, youth panel on climate change, so that any action from the UN side is not just informed by the views of the youth, giving young people equal voice so that they can also become very much part of the negotiation. And now, Namgay, if I may talk about what UNDP is doing, particularly in Bhutan, I think coming to the first question that Thinley and you have mentioned about the story, what we believe that there is no single story. People are affected differently. And that I learned after 2010 flood in Pakistan. I was there to do an assessment, and there are a lot of houses built. And a kid came to me, and he was school-going kid. And I asked him, what do you study? And he said, I study outside because we have a lot of sunlight. I said, why not inside? Because it's cold. And he said, look, the way the contractor put the window is in a wrong place. There is no sunlight coming. That means what is missing is the perspective of the young people often we neglect. I think what is emerging and a dominant practice to us is to how we make sure the stories, since people are impacted differently, as Karma very clearly mentioned, the young people, they would be impacted differently than women, and there are different groups of people. Rich people would be are affected differently than the poor. So there is a differential impact of climate change. So that generate different kind of stories. So we adopt a new approach we call human-centric design. In that human-centric design, allow us or enable all the stories to be heard when we design any program, any project, policies, and also support government in terms of policy advice. So that human-centric design principle is very, very powerful whatever we do. And for young people, and we have two tracks. One is making sure that human-centric design principle is offered to all sector, all section of the population groups. But we also have a dedicated youth portfolio at UNDP in Bhutan to make sure that the young people have choices. Your choices to become, if you want to become a business graduate, for example, that you understand what entails when it is climate change or environment. If you want to become an environment scientist, what needs to be done? So those choices are there. We're also focusing on how to do business despite all these odds, focusing on youth employment, focusing on youth engagement with parliament, lawmaking process. I would not say we're doing enough, but we need to do enough. We're never complacent, but that's the a bigger part of a bigger journey will continue. Over to you, Namgay.
Thank you, Khurshid. And finally, to Karma, sir, how important is the role of science communication, especially to translate the very complex data and the policy papers for a larger audience to understand?
I think the science communication is the fundamental part of all the communications in the context of climate change. Whatever is happening around the world, whatever is being discussed around the world is based on the scientific facts. So as a young people, I think you have a very important role to play in this one. And my perception on this would be, if as a youth, if you can directly involve with the scientific community, that will be the best course of action in terms of taking on board the youth's part in the conversation in the context of climate change. Now to do that on, I think that is where the international organizations, the private sectors, then mostly I think from the government side, the required platform has to be created. The required avenue has to be opened through policy, through regulations, and all those things. I think this is how we can bring in the youths in raising their voice in the context of climate change. I think, Namgay, you have already been a part of this. In Bhutan, I don't think we are totally lagging all of these opportunities since I've seen and I've heard from the youths, those who are indulging in this climate negotiations like Namgay here, and also Jamyang sitting at the back. I think he's a very young, energetic man who is traveling in the region to raise voice on the impacts of climate change, especially focusing on the high mountain Asian countries.
Thank you, La. So this brings us to the last leg of our conversation, and I want to be mindful of time and have uh, enough time to do the Q&A with all of you as well. The last question for our panel discussion then obviously is, what are the opportunities for climate action in Bhutan? Does there need to be another Bhutan story? Khurshid, why don't you take the lead on this?
don't consider me as a technologically unaware person. I'm learning from my daughters how to not become tech savvy, but also to learn new technologies. Since what is I already mentioned the what is the news story that is emerging, but I want to emphasize 2 3 points. One is um, um, the three turning points that's very important for us to look at, um, and combining with the role of young people. So one is not generally we know, it's not in the public space, that how the grassroots organizations are making local actions. UNDP does support almost 20 civil society every second year, so it's a 2-year cycle. They do a lot of interesting work. Let me just give you one example. Um, One is, you know, the, the greatest problem that we have to the environment is urbanization is one of them. Expansion of urbanization means you are losing environment. Expansion of agriculture is another challenge that we have. Then expansion of urbanization also degrading the urban biodiversity. So I was talking to one of the civil society organization. They're working in Thimphu, very small. What they're doing? They're doing, they're identifying what are the important plants for bird to survive. And because of urbanization, and those plants are not commercially important for us as a human being, we're cutting them, or we're not carrying them. So these smaller NGOs or CVOs, they are going and taking care of those plants which are important for the birds. So look at those stories that 20 civil society organization working at the grassroots levels, and they're led by young people like you. And often that story is not told. Second point is, the Bhutan's urban story is not very prominent. So UNDP is currently working on a people-centric urban resilience program, which would be approximately 20 million from government side, around $50 million program from Royal Government of Bhutan and UNDP. So we'll be working in the urban space to make sure how urbanization can be nature positive. And remember, when I talk about carbon civilization, and urban is very much dependent on the carbon. So transforming urban is a new story I feel that is emerging. And my last point is about Generation Z. And like you, there was a study published by McKinsey a couple of years back, and they try to understand what are the consumer behavior, future consumer behavior of all of you. And most of the young people said, Gen Zs are the generation born during the internet time, they said they are not going to buy any product that harm environment. They are not going to buy any product that cause problem to the climate change or emit carbon dioxide, or they exploit the labor. So we see a conscious consumerism emerging. And that is where Bhutan has a new story emerging, in my view, as you have done a tremendous sacrifice to protect this pristine environment. Bhutan also want to prosper. The 13 5-year plan is talking about doubling the GDP. I had a very rare opportunity to have an audience with His Majesty when he visited our office other day, and he talked about you can be rich and happy. So Bhutan can be rich and happy. So in that, I see Bhutan can be a destination for green investment. So turning Bhutan's green premium, what I say that carbon negative, pristine environment, good labor standard, educated, innovative, imaginative young labor force, then what we need to do, they turn that green premium to attract more investment to Bhutan. And government, Royal Government of Bhutan, I'm very mindful that they are working tireless, and UNDP is also supporting government to make sure that Bhutan gets that green premium to
Fantastic.
trade and
Yeah.
investment. Over to you now.
Thank you, Khurshid. Thinley.
We saw a signboard that says wrap up. I'll just say two things. I think in terms of, sorry, what was it called? Opportunities, right?
Yes.
Oh yeah, now I remember. I think in Bhutan, it's a disservice to ourselves if we have a single narrative. Like again, going back to the first question that was asked, if we stick to a single narrative about Bhutan, it doesn't give us much creative space to innovate and do things. So it's only in our favor to have multiple narratives of Bhutan, and to both Karma and Khurshid's point, depends. Your personal view is the universal view. What you experience, what you think, is universal to you as an individual. But I think that collectively, we should try and bring out more narratives of Bhutan, more narratives in the sense that we are challenging ourselves to be better than what we are, to be better than what we inherited and what we can take forward. But in terms of the opportunities from a climate lens, I think it's plenty. And Khurshid just outlined a very high macro level, government level, green investment, and how the government can play its part in facilitating that. But for the younger ones, this morning we had a session with the YY founder, the billionaire, right? I think in Asia we have an aversion towards, publicly at least, an aversion towards making profit and being competitive and being business-minded. But I think it's time for us to embrace it and go forth with it. Profit not by harming others, profit by making, helping others. So in other words, the fancy term is social entrepreneurship. So applying entrepreneurship skills into your problem solving and having a critical thinking mindset and imagination. And build into that the whole STEM education. It gives you the tools to build, but it starts with your imagination. It starts with your critical thinking. So I think in terms of opportunities, there are plenty. We just have to apply our entrepreneurial mindset into it.
And Karma, I'll let you have the last word.
I'll keep it very short, coming from the scientific community. Everybody, when you talk about climate change, we go directly into the negative side, destruction, damages. But as I have seen in the field, in the mountains, a simple case, a living example, I could enjoy fresh cucumber, like before the people in Thimphu can enjoy. So this is the impact of climate change. So this, I think we should take it as an opportunity. So now if you go to the literatures, the published literatures, even in the scientific nature journal, you can see a lot of literatures which are peer-reviewed and published based on the scientific facts, saying that there are immense opportunities, especially for the youths, starting from production to market to investment. So this is what climate change has created actually. What you need is just a little bit of innovation and the exact opportunity to seize. How you seize the opportunity is more important. That is how I feel when you talk about opportunities created by climate change. I think I'll stop here.
And with that, we have come to the end of the allocated time given to us. But thank you so much for this riveting conversation. And for our audience here, I encourage you to connect with our speakers and, of course, with myself if you would like to learn more about the work that we are doing. Thank you so much for being a great audience, and I wish you all a wonderful day ahead.